Yonko, thank you. Siguli gawasta na hewi na yongets, hongwe hongwe, monia daaga, akwali. Thankful to be here today, and one I would like to acknowledge the land acknowledgement that was done. It's very nice. It made me feel comfortable right away. And one thing, I guess I would bring some wisdom towards the land acknowledgement. It is something that makes Indigenous people very uncomfortable. A lot of times it feels like it's just kind of like a check mark that they're doing or something they're quickly going over really quick. And a lot of times they don't pronounce our like Anishinaabe or Haudenosaunee, they don't pronounce our names properly or take the time to learn that. So I know I went talking to my own community members on how they feel about the land acknowledgement. It feels like it's like another slap to the face, when it comes to truth and reconciliation. So I'm very thankful that people are starting to reach out and ask about the land acknowledgement and ask how we feel about it and asking how other ways they can go about it. So thank you for doing that land acknowledgement. It's great to hear what everyone else is talking about. I can hear about colonization, innovation, mental health, and that's exactly what Yotani and Gowesana, how we social enterprises both focus on. For thousands of years, in the land acknowledgement, it was stated that for thousands of years we were around and we were living on the land. And a lot of our education was based on the land. We were on the land doing the work. We were learning about the plants. We were learning about the seasons. We were learning about our ceremonies and what we were supposed to do for each season. We were learning how to be a community and our roles and responsibilities. And we lived a good life. We were working together and we were treating each other with respect and sharing our resources and not taking more than what we needed. And then the boat people came over and the settlers came over. And for thousands of years, they tried to take our people out by, going into our tribes and murdering our men and stealing our children and women. And then once Canada was formed, they decided to build up the residential schools and go into our communities and rip our children away from our families and throw them into these education systems, forcing this new education on them, but what it was forced was through violence and abuse and rape and torture, and just causing a lot of trauma into our people, into our communities. It caused a lot of trauma to the children that were attending these residential schools, but it also caused a lot of trauma to the communities, to the parents that lost their children. So they broke us, and then these children came back into our communities. They had children, and sadly, the same thing happened to them. Their children were taken as well and thrown into residential schools. I know my great grandparents were into residential schools, my grandparents, my parents, and I have cousins from my generation that went to a residential school because we had the last one close in 1996, and that was actually in Chippewa, First Nations of the Thames, Mount Elgin. So a lot of people in my generation were still going to residential schools. I think when it comes to education, I know it's great that a lot of places are trying to learn more about the Indigenous people and their culture, as well as the history between them and Canada. But there's a lot of truth that's still unknown. And one thing with even our own communities, like this isn't something, and we educated ourselves on, this isn't something that we talked about at the dinner table about residential schools or our experiences. So a lot of us grew up with lack of education of why we were struggling the way we were, why some of our parents were alcoholics or drug addicts or always in jail or just struggling. And a lot of that awareness wasn't there. It wasn't until I was in my later 20s when I started educating myself and I had to go outside of the college system and learn about my truth and learn about what my people had gone through. And a lot of that, it's a hard truth. It's a hard truth to learn, and it's a hard conversation to have. A lot of people don't want to have these conversations about what the Indigenous people have been through. It triggers anger, it triggers guilt, it could trigger shame. So it's not comfortable, it's not comfortable for both sides. So I think that when it comes to education, that there's something that we definitely need to start doing and start learning about each other and start learning this truth and having these difficult conversations, but also mental health. Mental health is so important. I always thought it was very important before the COVID-19 happened. And now that COVID-19 happened, I'm just seeing all the mental health issues that are building up, that are just getting more extreme for people. And right now we're all in survival mode, especially with my Indigenous people. We're falling through the cracks. We're not getting the right supports. Sadly, one of the northern communities were sent body bags when they were asked to get supplies for this COVID-19, and they were sent body bags. And sadly, that's the response that we get. So it's like we have to come together, and we are trying to come together with little bit that we have, and we're trying to share and support each other. But at the same time, again, we're struggling with our own mental health issues. So when teaching the youth, I created Yotani so that we could bring back some innovative education, and based on our traditional ways. A lot of people are talking about land-based learning now, which is great too, because it's getting people back to the land and connected with the land. A lot of people don't feel like they need to be connected to the land, but again, that's what you live off, and that's what you thrive off. It's Mother Earth that gives us life, and water and trees and animals. And it is Indigenous people, that's something that's very important to us. So even before we do any kind of event or teachings or anything, we always, instead of doing a land acknowledgement, we acknowledge Mother Earth and all of creation. And we take time to acknowledge that. So we'll say, we gather our minds as one, and we give love and appreciation and thanks to Mother Earth. And again, we gather our minds as one, and we give appreciation to the sky, to the moon, to the sun, to the land animals, to the water animals. And this appreciation and this prayer or opening can take a very long time, depending on how much thanks and appreciation we're giving. One thing that we're getting back to is getting back to land-based learning, and starting to, and non-Indigenous people want to learn about that as well. I think it's great that we're all learning together, and it's not just something that's with Indigenous culture. It's not just something that we think is just best for us. There's a lot of teachings in there, like the 7 grandfather teachings, the medicine wheel teachings, that can help other people in their journeys of life. And those teachings are something, as long as you get them properly and you have someone that's teaching you that's something that we can all learn. A lot of people are question like, well, what can we learn about the culture? Our ceremonies are something that's sacred. So that's not something that non-Indigenous people can learn and then go ahead and practice. That's something that, the people that do those ceremonies, they do a lot of work. They do a lot of volunteer work. They put a lot of time and effort into learning the practices and learning the proper ways of doing it, and then take the time to keep practicing that until they get more confident with it and it becomes their way of knowing. So when it comes to ceremonies, that's something that's very sacred to us, and not something that's just open for anyone to learn. But again, being mindful and learning our truth, and all of our truths, is something that we can definitely do. Everyone was affected by colonization. It's not just the Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, or Inuits as well. You see it all around the world that people have been affected by this education system, and it hurt a lot of people. So what is helping us is we're bringing back our Indigenous teachers, and we're creating this safe space where we can learn about our culture and learn about our ways and learn about our history, learn about what our people have been through, and what our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, learn about what they've all been through, and helping us understand. Although it's a very horrific and it's a hard subject to learning that helps us understand why we struggle as individuals, or why we struggle as a family, or why we struggle as a community. One of the call to action is we need to open our hearts, our minds, and our ears, and to listen. And it's not, a lot of times when we're listening and when we're learning something, when we're listening, we're analyzing, we're categorizing, we're labeling, and that's not how you need to learn. When you open up your mind and your heart and your ears, when we say that, we mean that you're opening it up and you're just listening to these stories, that you're taking in this truth, and then you're learning from that. A lot of times we're so quick to respond and say how we're feeling about things or what we're thinking, and yet we're missing a lot because we're not giving that person an opportunity to share all of their truth. We're cutting it off. So I think that the more that we open our minds, our hearts, and our ears, the more we give opportunity to learn. Another one is to be mindful. The indigenous people are still learning their truth. You know, we're still learning what happened to us and what happened to our people and how we were treated. And it creates a lot of anger. It creates a lot of anxiety. And again, in the system, education system, we didn't learn about mental health. We didn't learn about how to deal with trauma or frustration. And that's why a lot of us are struggling now with COVID-19. We don't know how to handle these kind of situations because this is the education that we lack in our systems. So we need to be more mindful of each other and mindful that we're learning and give ourselves that space to learn, as well as we need to start talking a lot about more mental health. One of the things that I've been doing is implementing mental health into my business training. I've been working with a lot of my community members from Chippewa, Muncie, and Oneida, and being my own social entrepreneur and trying to be, being a woman and trying to be successful was very hard being an Indigenous woman. I ran into many barriers that I ran into as a child, as a youth, and I ran into as an entrepreneur. So I think it's so important that we're teaching these mental health issues and how to deal with these emotions and these triggers and how to understand ourselves, because it helps us when we're just trying to go through life and deal with things. So I think mental health is definitely important, and we need to get back to bringing more cultures into our education and learning and experience, and as well as get back to the land-based learning, which we see is happening. So I'm really thankful to see that there's changes happening. I know we still have a long ways to go. I know some people are on board and saying, let's do this. And some people are still like, they don't get it. But that's where we have to be mindful of them as well, too, and understand that, you know, everyone comes at their own pace. And those that we, again, learn how to dance through that room. So if we see people that are learning, wanting to learn, then let's work with them. But those that who aren't ready, then, you know, just give them that space. And when they're ready, they're ready. So I think it's just great that we're having these conversations, and you know, even though not all of them are easy conversations, and I think it's beautiful that there's many other people out there that are thinking different ways of how we can bring about our education and how we can change things and how it works for more people. And thank you for that, Young Go, for this opportunity. Thank you.